The female lead let out a long yawn just as the early morning sun streamed through the window. She blinked awake, immediately wondering what on earth made her doze off. The girl let out a blood-curdling scream of panic as a status window suddenly appeared before her eyes. The female lead was stunned when she realized she couldn't speak normally. The status window informed her that she was an NPC and would be killed by her biological father on her 9th birthday. Just a minute ago, she was mindlessly scrolling through her phone, but now, just because her initial role was so bad, she was a low-ranking NPC. She had been diligently grinding her cube to level 9, to the point of burning through her wallet. She couldn't believe she had actually transmigrated. The girl looked up and stared at the status window, observing it carefully. The worst part was that she would die at the hands of her own father when she turned 9. Even for a nameless NPC, this was too much to bear. The female lead burst into tears. A strange woman approached, hugging her tightly as if to comfort her. The maid gently picked her up and said that NAMA-MANGAI would be here soon. The girl immediately felt a sense of warmth and security from the maid, and now she truly realized the fate of an early death hanging over her head. The female lead began to pray silently, begging for someone to come and save her. She really hoped this was just a nightmare and that she would wake up soon. But if things were already this bad, why not try to live a proper second life? The female lead realized she was the only daughter of a wealthy, noble family. Luckily, it wasn't the dirt-poor kind of noble family. Her parents couldn't be bothered to care about her because they basically didn't care about anything. But for the female lead, that made things easier. When it was time to slip away, she could. The third key piece of information, she was stuck in a game world. Specifically, a game called Rebirth, a mobile game based on the novel The Heroes of Helios. Players would roll dice to choose a character from the story, then make decisions based on the chosen character. The character ranking system was divided by their importance in the original plot, starting from level 1, an extra, to level 5, the main character. Our female lead was stuck at level 1. Whatever rank she got was one thing, but the problem was she didn't even know who she was. A week had passed since she was sucked into the game, and she still didn't have a name. Considering her predetermined fate, it was understandable why her father didn't bother with her, but her mother hadn't shown her face either. Even so, the female lead decided not to jump to conclusions. She took a deep breath and exhaled, trying to calm herself down to deal with her terrible future. The female lead was waiting for her name to appear so she could start planning to change her fate. When the status window disappeared, the little girl started yawning from exhaustion. Perhaps it was because her body was that of a child that she felt sleepy all the time. She closed her eyes, deciding to think more after she woke up. The next morning, the little girl was happy to be attentively fed by the maids. Today, everyone seemed busy, making the female lead curious about what was happening. The maids started cleaning her room. The young lady and the female lead couldn't understand their strange movements. A maid asked NAMA-MANGAI if she should move the stone cup elsewhere. She said to just put it on the display shelf because the young lady liked it. The maid immediately objected, saying it was absurd for such a small child to notice such things. But NAMA-MANGAI said the baby was not only smart, but also wonderful, adding that her eyes always shone as if she understood everything. The female lead realized she should have pretended to be a little more clueless. She noticed the information window had switched to the background character version, displaying her gender and age. But she still hadn't seen the skill window, which frustrated her immensely. If she was stuck in this level 1 character's body, who knew what would happen to the cube? That was the item she had spent all her money upgrading. She thought to herself, didn't a window appear when the cube leveled up last time? Now she still couldn't believe that upgrading the cube to level 9 had caused her to transmigrate here. A level 9 causing a displacement like this was ridiculous. If that was really the case, shouldn't she at least have a better fate? The little girl told herself to stay calm. After all, what was done was done. There was no point in getting angry over something she couldn't change. Deciding to keep her spirits up, she reminded herself that her will would shape her destiny. Perhaps the cube's buff was hard to check because she was a child. Madame Eris wondered if they would have time to prepare before the master returned. The letter arrived late, but they had to finish everything before he appeared. A maid started to complain, so Madame Eris requested the floor be wiped again. Even if it was difficult, they had to keep working. It was then that the female lead realized she had never met the master of this mansion, as he hadn't been here yet. It seemed no one cared about the little girl, so she could just stay quiet and disappear without a trace. Madame Eris warned that if anyone dared to neglect the young lady's care, the master would not let it slide. Then she smiled, telling Urine to calm down, while the maid pleaded with her not to joke about such serious matters. The female lead thought to herself, even if she could rewrite her fate, there were no guarantees. The little girl was frozen with fear as a terrifying thought struck her. What if her father went mad and killed her before she turned 9? The female lead swore that if she ever met the devs who made this game, she would make them pay. The black-haired maid grinned when she saw the little lady was already awake early. Ednis noticed the little girl seemed to be in a better mood than usual today. The female lead was so excited that the precious items in the room seemed to glow, calling out to her. Money was a completely new and breathtakingly overwhelming concept for this little kid. Selena, a maid, quickly apologized for not knocking, then announced that there was a message from the head butler. The room held its breath as the maid dropped the bombshell. The master had returned to the mansion. The female lead didn't understand why he had returned so quickly. Only 2 days had passed. She still wasn't mentally prepared to face her biological father, the man destined to kill her later. Madame Eris immediately yelled at the maids to clean up quickly. She had to go see the master right away. The little girl started to panic, guessing he might come straight to her room. Judging by the speed of his return, it must be something extremely urgent. The female lead knew that whenever things got tense, she would shut down her brain and pretend to sleep. The little girl's eyes flew open just as the door burst open with a bang and he appeared. The red-haired man walked into the room. Now, the female lead finally knew what her biological father looked like. The Heroes of Helios was a story about a male protagonist who saves the world from a brutal demon king. The demon king manipulated the minds of monsters and then unleashed them upon the human world. To fight back, a suppression unit was formed, and every noble family had to participate in the family of the female lead was the head of this year's suppression team. After completing his mission, he didn't hesitate and went straight home to see his daughter. The female lead couldn't understand why a father would be so cold to his own biological child. She wasn't ready, at least not mentally, to face him. He stood right next to the cradle, his eyes fixed on her as if analyzing something. He was more handsome than the female lead had imagined, but he exuded an intense, murderous aura, as if he could punch a lion into oblivion. The little girl didn't understand why he was looking at her like that. That gaze started to give the female lead goosebumps. She panicked, realizing he could kill her right here and now. But then, the little girl remembered the only way to handle the situation, the ultimate cheat code for every baby. She turned her head away and pretended to be falling asleep right in front of him. The female lead just hoped he would see her sleeping soundly and leave. The wet nurse gently said that the little lady was tired and told him he could take off his armor and rest. He asked coldly, "Do children this small have the guts to stare at people?" Madame Eris replied that at this age, they are exploring the world, and it's completely normal. She guessed the child was only acting that way because he was a close relative. The female lead thought to herself, if he throws a fit next time, she'll just turn her face away and be done with it. Suddenly, she felt a strong hand picking her up. If she opened her eyes now, she'd be done for, so she had to keep pretending to be asleep. The little girl burped right in her father's face, then immediately cursed herself internally. She just had to hold on for 5 more minutes. The master of the mansion asked the wet nurse, "Do babies burp in their sleep?" Madame Eris replied that a gentle pat on the back during a nap could indeed make them burp. The man thought for a moment, and the little girl silently thanked the wet nurse for saving her life. He placed the baby back in the cradle and told the wet nurse, "I'm going to take off my armor." The maids whispered among themselves that Madame Eris was a true lifesaver, always keeping her cool. Ednis was relieved to see the young lady was still safe. The female lead guessed Ednis must have been scared to death too, but she tried to stay strong for her. The female lead's father had golden eyes, a rare trait in the novel. Based on how the wet nurse addressed him, she guessed he was at least a marquis, but that didn't make sense. Was there any noble character in the story with both red hair and golden eyes? She couldn't remember anything about this family, so they probably weren't a major part of the original plot. If they were important, she wouldn't have been assigned the role of a nameless level 1 NPC like this. Anyway, he had just returned, so soon enough, she would know her name and what godforsaken place she was in. The next day, her father left the mansion again, probably to go to the capital to report on the rebellion they had just quelled. He was supposed to return after finishing his report, but for some reason, he came back to the mansion immediately. The female lead concluded that her father was truly an unpredictable person. Ennis noticed the little girl was lost in thought and gave her a gentle nudge to remind her to smile more brightly. The young woman couldn't understand how this little kid could be as sweet as an angel. Since the female lead was in a very good mood today, she gave the maid a bright smile. The maid gushed over how beautiful that smile was, even saying that the little girl looked just like her mother. Madame Eris immediately told the maid to be quiet, muttering that it was a good thing the master wasn't here. Right now, the female lead guessed her father probably didn't care much about her, perhaps because of something related to her mother. She wasn't sure if her mother was really dead, or if her father was just blaming everything on her. But based on what Madame Eris said, it was clear that something had happened between the two of them. Maybe if she found out the reason, she would have a chance to survive. The little girl glanced at her favorite maid and flashed another radiant smile. Zudge realized that this year's suppression campaign was lasting much longer than usual. It usually only took 1 to 2 months, but this time it was already the 3rd month. The female lead also realized that her father was actually present when she was born. Recalling his coldness when they first met, she mentally labeled him as emotionless. The best strategy now was to avoid him as much as possible. Even so, it seemed he wasn't intentionally hiding her name. Once she knew her name, she would understand which family she belonged to and what her position was. The little girl swore that she would change her fate no matter the cost. Then she drifted off to sleep, dreaming of a flashing object right in front of her, a level 9 cube. But the system announced that she hadn't unlocked it yet. It also added that a game event had started, but the main character had not yet met the conditions to activate it. The little girl woke with a start when someone called her. She looked at her tiny hands, wondering if that was just a dream. Ennis bent down and worriedly asked the little girl if she was okay, as she looked like she had just had a nightmare. The female lead was startled to see her maid so scared and silently apologized. Ennis guessed it was just a dream, but now the little girl was wide awake. Madame Eris reminded Ennis to check the room again before lunch. The female lead was a bit panicked when she heard the wet nurse say the master would be returning tonight. The little girl was annoyed that she had been mentally preparing for so long, yet he still hadn't shown his face. A maid entered and informed the madam that the master was on his way back. The female lead was caught off guard again, as he appeared as suddenly as last time. He walked straight to the cradle, and the little girl stared at him. The female lead noticed a small golden dragon brooch pinned to his collar. She quickly turned away, and the wet nurse explained that children of this age are very prone to mood swings. The master said, from the day she was born until now, she still doesn't have a name, so we must give her one. The female lead was incredibly excited. After 3 long months, she was finally getting a name. She silently hoped it would be a pleasant one. But then, he suddenly declared, the name Cobra sounds good. For a child born into a family of assassins, that name sounded very fitting. The female lead was in complete shock. She couldn't understand how on earth he would name his daughter Cobra for that reason. He looked straight into the little girl's eyes, his reflection clear in her pupils. Just then, the system window appeared, announcing that the time selection event had begun. The female lead was immediately confused, not understanding what was happening. She also didn't understand why everyone around her had suddenly gone silent like statues. Then suddenly, the system announced that the next choice would be determined by the player's action, and her body could move again. The female lead understood that the choice was now hers to make. Looking at his eyes, she realized that if she didn't like something, she just had to show it. Immediately, the little girl waved her arms and thrashed about, making sounds of protest. He held out his hand, and the little girl placed a fake flower in his palm. The man stared at his hand, where the flower of Alice was placed. He never thought he would see an Alice flower this season, so he clenched it tightly. The master of the mansion calmly declared, forget the old name, let's give her a new one. The female lead's eyes immediately lit up when she heard him call her Alice Devon. The wet nurse and her personal maid immediately beamed, congratulating the young lady on her brand new name. The female lead couldn't believe she had just defeated her stubborn father. The status window reported that the conditions had been met and the character rank would be updated. The character information was just refreshed, and the skill potential had been unlocked. The female lead noticed a new section about her father, mentioning his madness and the separation event, so detailed that it made the little girl want to cry. Suddenly, she remembered hearing the name Devon somewhere before. That's right, the crest on her father's clothes. She wondered if the Devon family was of the dragon bloodline, the heirs of dragon blood with terrifying powers that the Empire whispered about. The female lead had always suspected this family was no ordinary one. If they forced her to come here, then she must be truly valuable. She began to search her memories, trying to remember anything else she had read about this family. The Devon family was full of secrets, most of which were related to the side effects of the dragon blood. If an outsider had a child with them, the mother would suffer a painful death. There were even members of the clan who couldn't control their own power and went mad. The little girl guessed that her mother might have died in childbirth, and her father hated her for it. The female lead shivered when she met his icy gaze. Then he announced, "Now that the Devon child has a name, we must hold a celebration." The wet nurse and the maid smiled brightly, agreeing that the master was absolutely right. He recalled that when his daughter was born, he was still on the battlefield and had never celebrated her birth. So he ordered a grand party to be held for the first daughter of the Devon house. He asked how long it would take to prepare, and the servant replied that it depended on the number of guests. The red-haired man did a quick mental calculation. It would probably take about a month. The wet nurse and the maid nodded immediately, promising to follow the master's orders. His gaze returned to his little daughter, whose round eyes were still wide with shock. He said he would speak to the butler himself, and the wet nurse immediately nodded vigorously, showing her obedience. The female lead was stunned. He didn't even bother to say goodbye to her. She stuck out her tongue teasingly, glaring at her own father. Only then did Alice realize he was still tightly clutching the flower brooch she had given him. That detail made her pause, and new thoughts and questions began to form in her mind. She closed her eyes, guessing he was just a very shy person. A week passed since her naming day, and then her father appeared again out of the blue, without any warning. The female lead couldn't understand why he kept coming. Just to look at Alice was completely shocked, wondering if he had realized the soul inside wasn't his daughter's. But Ennis quickly answered for her. "Yes, it's Alice." And Alice realized the question wasn't aimed at her. He knew that, during his absence, Madame Eris was the one who took care of Alice. The maid nodded, asking him why he brought that up. He continued coldly, "Have you noticed anything strange about the young lady?" Ennis started to panic, stammering a few words, but he ordered her to speak clearly. The female lead didn't understand what was strange, so she needed more time. In her head, she screamed at the maid to answer properly. But unexpectedly, her father declared, "You are not fit to be a servant for the Devon family." And he ordered Ennis to be dismissed from the mansion by tomorrow. At that moment, the system announced that a new event had been triggered, and the female lead was not ready at all. She silently blamed herself. She shouldn't have let Ennis get fired. Her body couldn't move, but she knew she had to protect Ennis. The female lead stared at the rattle near it. The system warned, "Your actions will affect the outcome." She grabbed the rattle and threw it between the two of them. Both her father and Ennis immediately turned to look at her, stunned. He stared at his daughter, but the little girl didn't even blink. Those eyes were already too used to that cold gaze. Without any fear, she turned to look at Ennis, her face lighting up with joy. The little girl reached out her arms, silently pleading for Ennis to take her hand. Then she suddenly realized she was about to fall, her legs still too weak. The maid quickly picked her up, warning the young lady to be careful, that her last action was really dangerous. The little girl glared at her father and silently asked in her head, "Who do you think you are to fire my maid?" Ennis was far more precious to the female lead than he was. The man immediately realized that the maid was very important to his daughter, Alice. Ennis quickly smiled and said, "The master is not wrong at all." Without another thought, he yelled at the maid, "Put the young lady back in bed and get out. Alice, and I need to talk alone for a bit." The female lead breathed a sigh of relief. At least Ennis wasn't fired anymore. Even so, Alice was determined that when she grew up, she would definitely get revenge on this father of hers. The female lead was extremely surprised to see her father suddenly raise his fist. She immediately squinted, thinking he was about to punch her. But then he pinned a flower brooch onto his daughter's clothes. He explained, "I had prepared a gift for an important day, but I couldn't come empty-handed." He paused for a moment and then said, "Consider it a small gift for my daughter." He thought it wouldn't look good if the only daughter of the Devon house didn't receive any gifts from her parents. and then people would start to gossip. The female lead was stunned. He actually cared about things like that. A person who only ever worries about the family's reputation. And he named his daughter Alice? No way. The little girl glared at him disdainfully, thinking, "You think I'll be fooled by that cheap trick?" He sighed, muttering, "I don't even know why I'm explaining this to a baby." The female lead was very pleased with her performance. Now she stared at the brooch, silently asking, "Did he really give this to me?" It looked like he was trying to treat her like family, but in reality, the female lead still didn't understand his true intentions. Even so, she still felt happy. Ennis, her closest maid, was finally happy again, which was understandable since she wasn't fired. Her father had said that if it was someone Alice liked, he would continue to keep an eye on her. He had trusted them both. Ennis now had to take even better care of the young lady. And to be honest, this brooch was definitely not an ordinary item. The maid said she had never seen a brooch with such a unique cut. She added that the brooch really suited the young lady. Time passed quickly and peacefully, and the day of Alice's birthday celebration arrived. During that time, the female lead had learned to roll over with confidence. Now she could say a few short, albeit jumbled, sentences that others could understand. The maids gathered around the cradle and said it was time to get ready, as the young lady was awake. Ennis's face lit up, and she said immediately, "It's time, let's get ready." She ordered Urine to drop the bath bomb into the tub, as the young lady was about to get in. Another maid ran in and shouted that the kitchen was in urgent need of help. Selena complained that her side was also busy, but still told Urine to go help. The female lead opened her eyes, surprised that she didn't know when she had fallen asleep. But now she felt wide awake. Madame Eris told the young lady that she was about to wake her up, but she had woken up on her own. Suddenly, the female lead noticed the wet nurse looked quite exhausted. The head housekeeper informed the master that she was preparing for the celebration. She advised him not to hold the young lady too tightly, as the baby was still small and fragile. The father nodded and said, "Don't worry, I can control my strength." The female lead didn't understand why he was holding her, or had everyone else left. Alice prayed endlessly, hoping that he wouldn't squeeze her neck until it broke during today's ceremony. Suddenly, she remembered the conversation last night between the wet nurse and Ennis. Madame Eris had said that the young lady's debut ceremony would be accompanied by her father. Now Alice understood. Madame Eris meant that her father would be the one to carry her out for her debut. Everything was set in stone. She couldn't change it, only hope for the best. Lately, the father and daughter had grown closer, so maybe he wouldn't intentionally hurt her. But the way he was holding her was completely wrong. He should support the baby's head in the crook of his elbow, holding her close to his chest. But no, he was holding her in some strange way, making the female lead extremely uncomfortable. When she started to cry and flail her arms, he tensed up. He asked, "What's wrong? Are you hungry?" But Madame Eris had clearly said she had just eaten. The female lead wasn't hungry. It was just that he was holding her all wrong. Alice got even more flustered when she heard him ask, or is her diaper dirty? She started to cry louder, not understanding how the conversation had gone so far off track. But after less than 5 minutes, the female lead stopped crying and silently resigned herself to her fate. He was bewildered, not understanding why the little girl had suddenly stopped crying, thinking it was just a tantrum. Then, in a more serious tone, he asked Alice, "Are you not feeling well?" The female lead really couldn't understand what nonsense this man was talking about. At that moment, he suddenly became visibly tense because Alice was fussing less than usual. The little girl finally gave up and told her father straight, "You're holding me wrong." The door burst open, and the wet nurse entered and announced, "The banquet is about to begin. You shouldn't go anywhere." The father turned and said, "Good thing you came just in time. Alice doesn't seem well. Look at her face. Doesn't she look very uncomfortable?" The wet nurse calmly told him not to worry and let her check to be sure. One look at Madame Eris's face, and you could tell she knew what was happening. She said firmly to him, "The young lady is perfectly healthy. There's nothing to worry about." Madame Eris guessed the young lady was simply uncomfortable because her father was holding her too tightly. The young lady is still too small. Her neck needs to be supported properly. The father was confused, as he thought he was holding her just fine. The wet nurse said they had to leave soon, so it would be best if he held his daughter himself. She demonstrated the correct way to hold her, then said the signal would come within 10 minutes. The female lead started to grin, because her father now knew how to hold his child. The Duke smiled faintly, muttering, "Raising a child requires more patience than I thought." Just then, a servant announced loudly, Duke Lucius Devon and tonight's guest of honor, Lady Alice Devon. The guests murmured their congratulations to the Duke, not forgetting to present gifts to celebrate the lady's birth. Alice sat there, bored to tears, but figured it would be over soon. She noticed someone bringing a magical beast egg, which looked to be of a high grade. A guest congratulated the Devon family on the birth of their new lady, adding that he would prepare an even more special gift. Duke Lucius said, Lord Ambeck must have gone to great trouble to obtain this egg, so it was indeed a valuable gift. But for Alice, who might not live past her 9th birthday, it was just a pretty rock. The little girl wondered why people were still lining up to give gifts. Suddenly, the female lead met a pair of gray eyes looking straight at her. She widened her eyes in astonishment when she realized it was the game's main character, Inadio. Alice had heard that there would be royal guests today, but she never expected it to be the male lead of the game. Lord Cieli said that today's hunt was quite dangerous, but thanks to the Devon family's team, the damage was minimized. The female lead guessed that Duke Cieli was the official royal envoy, representing the crown to congratulate the lady. He brought a specialty from his own duchy. Alice's father gave a faint smile, saying he had prepared a high-grade die as a gift. The female lead glared at her father, thinking, is this a die or a belt for heaven's sake? She knew this type of item in the game required real money to obtain. It was an extremely hot item. If she hadn't poured money into this game back then, she wouldn't be stuck in this ridiculous world now. She looked at Inadio and had to admit he was truly the male lead, looking absolutely perfect. But then the female lead froze when she realized he was staring at her. The prince whispered the name of Devon's daughter, but Duke spoke up, wishing Alice divine blessings, health, and wisdom. The female lead was completely clueless about what was going on. It was clear the prince was about to say something, but was interrupted. She, on the other hand, breathed a sigh of relief because she was finally about to go to bed. But Alice froze once again when she realized it wasn't over. The servant announced that the lady's father's gift was about to be presented. A group of people brought in a large painting covered with a semi-transparent veil. The female lead guessed he had commissioned a portrait or something similar. She wasn't sure when it was painted, but hey, anything useful was good. She looked at her father and immediately shivered. There was something very strange in his eyes. The little girl could only pray to God that the painting wasn't some kind of psychologically haunting artwork. The guests whispered, wondering why there was a flower brooch attached to the painting. The entire hall could see it clearly. The Duke was deeply in love with his daughter. The female lead still didn't understand what this father of hers was thinking, but he had indeed put in the effort. If that was Alice's flower brooch, she already had one. Why would she need a second one? She didn't know how to handle this situation, so she just pretended to be sleepy to get it over with. Duke Lucius inspected the gift, then took the flower brooch. The female lead was completely shocked when he pinned it on her. The people around went wild as he publicly showed his love for his daughter in front of the guests. He sat down in front of the little girl, about to say something, but then he changed his mind and stood up immediately, leaving Alice confused about what had just happened. The Duke announced, "The guests have prepared entertainment. Now everyone please enjoy yourselves." He raised his glass and shouted, "May the future of Devon be infinitely bright." The female lead didn't know who was making all that noise. She just wanted to sleep for a bit. She peeked open her eyes, having never heard that voice before. Then Alice suddenly realized if she didn't know these people, it meant they were strangers. A strange girl said, "The Duke's daughter has opened her eyes." The children chattered. "Her eyes are yellow. They're mesmerizingly beautiful. Prince Inadio, you have to see this." The baby just opened her eyes. The prince sighed wearily. "Could you kids at least be quiet?" Alice didn't understand what was happening. Ordinary people weren't allowed in this luxurious drawing room, so she couldn't figure out how these strange kids got in here and were even next to the main character. One of them said to Jennifer, "The Duke looks scary, but his daughter is super cute." "Yeah, she's really cute." She woke up without crying at all. Herman asked, "Don't babies usually cry when they're hungry or need to go to the bathroom?" The female lead was startled, realizing the names of these kids sounded very familiar. Then it hit Harayuro. This was the group of heroes from the game. The kids still didn't understand why they were here. Prince Inadio told the kids, "You've seen enough, now get out." Herman pouted, pleading, "Let us stay a little longer. We haven't even seen any guards yet, have we?" The prince snapped, "You guys already snuck in, and now you want to break more rules." Jennifer retorted, "If we've already broken the rules once, staying a little longer won't make much of a difference." Herman tilted his head and asked, "So we can really stay?" The little girl even said slyly, "My father is probably busy drinking. He won't care." Herman also chimed in, "My dad's the same. He told me to just hang out until they leave." Anyway, the baby clearly prefers playing with us than lying alone in a room. Prince Anadio thought for a moment and then nodded. He saw that the kids had a point. Herman looked at Alice's chubby cheeks and was so captivated he wanted to pinch them. Jennifer got annoyed and yelled, "Don't. That's rude." But Herman asked back, "Weren't we already rude before?" The prince reminded him that if he touched the baby with unclean hands, she would get a cold. Herman asked again, bewildered. Anadio said that he didn't want the baby to get sick either, right? Herman agreed, while Jennifer called Anadio over. The two of them looked at the baby and praised her nonstop. Lost in the cuteness, Herman forgot himself and touched the baby. Jennifer immediately nagged Herman, but she was jealous that Herman got to touch Alice. Unable to resist, she also reached out her hand. Alice smiled brightly in response. The prince reminded them that it was time for them to go. Jennifer encouraged Anadio to come see the baby. The prince refused because he had already seen the baby. Jennifer told him to be more honest with himself. The kids just grinned and urged the prince to hurry up. "Hold out your hand." The prince asked blankly what they were doing, but Herman cut in. "Come on, don't pretend anymore." The truth was, Anadio really found this baby insanely. Goo! His face turned red when baby Alice grabbed his outstretched finger. The female lead looked straight into the prince's eyes, smiling innocently like a fool, while Anadio coolly admitted, "Yeah, her hand is really soft." Jennifer confessed, "At first, I didn't want to come to Devon because it's so far, but now I see it was worth it." Actually, the female lead was starving, but she was determined not to cry. If it weren't for these kids, Alice would have been wailing a long time ago. She thought she should probably pretend to be asleep so they would leave on their own. The kids saw her yawn and thought she was probably about to fall asleep for real. Just then, Madame Eris walked in and asked, "Is the young lady still sleeping?" The little nobles panicked when they realized they had been discovered. The nanny walked in, clearly not happy at all. "How did you sirs and madams get in here?" Anadio calmly raised his hand. "Let me explain this." Just as he was about to say his name, baby Alice suddenly wailed as if the house was on fire. The kids froze, and Jennifer exclaimed, "What's wrong?" Herman shook his head. "She was fine just a moment ago." Madame Eris picked the baby up. "It's okay. She's just hungry." The nanny turned to the kids. "Lady Devon needs to be fed immediately." Herman was about to argue, but Jennifer covered his mouth. "We'll leave right away." But he kept squirming, not wanting to leave at all. As soon as the children were out of sight, Madame Eris chuckled softly. "It seems our young lady has just gained a few older siblings." Herman and Jennifer bowed their heads in apology for their rudeness. Prince Anadio sighed, "I'm truly sorry." Duke Cle and Duke Windsor also bowed their heads to Alice's father. "We will keep a closer eye on the children. If Lord Devon wishes, we are prepared to offer a formal apology." Madame Eris walked in with Alice, and the baby giggled as if she'd won the lottery. Lucius admitted, "I was also confused when I heard about what just happened." He knew the children and the prince were still young, but youth couldn't be an excuse for everything. The other two dukes also took responsibility. "We completely agree and will take full responsibility." Duke Devon asked coldly, "What if something had happened to Alice?" Then he also admitted that part of the fault was his own for being careless and letting the kids in. But it was clear the children had no ill intentions. According to Madame Eris, the kids were just playing with Alice. The female lead looked at Anadio, trying to act displeased, and giggled. Lucius said he would handle this matter as a collective responsibility and resolve it according to Devon's official stance. Herman and Jennifer high-fived in celebration, while their parents nodded at the Duke's generosity. A maid came in to announce, "The evening event is about to begin." Everyone moved to the patron hall. Herman's jaw dropped when he saw the crowd of shining stars. The female lead smiled when she saw the kids having so much fun. The steward shouted, "The final event is about to begin. Everyone please look up at the sky. We will start the Heavenly Path program right now." Herman's jaw dropped when he saw the twinkling lights in the sky. He turned to Jennifer. "You have to see this." But she was already looking at something else. In a flash, the twinkling lights transformed into a golden dragon flying fiery across the sky. This magical sight made the whole crowd scream. Jennifer's eyes widened. That's definitely the sacred dragon of the Devon family. Alice realized her father was looking at her. The familiar sharp eyes were different today. That gaze was as warm as the sun, making her feel her heart melt. Alice shook her head, telling herself, "I'm just too sleepy. Don't overthink it." The nanny tugged at Alice's sleeve. "Young lady, look up." Alice looked up and held her breath. The light transformed into her exact likeness, just like the portrait, like a perfect spell. The guest began to whisper, "It's not just love, it's absolute devotion." Alice had never dared to dream that someone would do this for her. Never in her entire previous life. Lucius's expression changed when he heard Madame Eris say, "The young lady is very happy today." Madame Eris told the little girl, "Stop squirming, it's dangerous." But Duke Devon ordered, "Give Alice to me." The nanny immediately and obediently handed the baby over without hesitation. She carried the child to the Duke, who gently held his daughter in a loving and tender embrace. Herman was stunned to see the Alice in the sky move, the light from her shining brighter than all the stars. Lucius murmured, "This magic still can't fully capture her true beauty." Alice almost burst out laughing after hearing her father's voice, and his expression made her grin from ear to ear. But deep down, the female lead still felt uneasy. After learning her fate and identity, all Alice could think about was escaping. She was sure she would push this man away, yet he kept trying to get closer to her time and time again. Lucius silently apologized to his daughter, confessing that he loved her more than anything and promised to be a good father from now on. Alice kept repeating in her head that he had intended to name her after a snake and planned to kill her at age 9. She tried to hate him to the bone, just wanting to escape this destiny as soon as possible. Suddenly, a gentle smile appeared on Duke Devon's face as he said thank you to Alice. The female lead's heart sank. She had clearly tried to keep her distance. She covered her face with her hands, and the Duke thought his daughter was uncomfortable again. But then Alice smiled again, embracing the fragile hope of a miracle that she could stay by her father's side for a while longer. Duke CLE and Windsor also sent their thanks to Duke Devon for letting their children play with the little lady. Jennifer scowled. "Herman, don't just call her by her name like that." The little girl was still amazed. How could her cheeks be so soft? Ednis blushed. "The young lady is so cute. Just looking at her makes me happy." The female lead facepalmed internally. "Ednis, please don't act like that in front of the kids." Even the prince was staring blankly. The maid picked up the young lady and told her, "Young lady, let's go back to your room." Ednis held Alice, and the little girl immediately noticed the prince was looking at her. The female lead sighed, "Thought, what's in your brain that makes you keep looking at me like that?" A true main character would never show their feelings to someone they don't care about. Alice vaguely remembered that Inadio's ability was related to prophecy. The butler shouted for the next carriage. "You can go." Duke Windsor congratulated Duke Devon on the new addition to his family. Herman suddenly fell to the ground with a thud, shouting, "I want to stay and live with Alice forever." Everyone burst out laughing, except for Duke Devon. Duke Clay promised his son, "We will definitely come back to visit Alice." He even made a pinky promise to make Herman believe him. The young Duke waved goodbye and shouted, "I'll definitely be back." Lucius frowned and asked, "Who gave that brat permission to come back whenever he wants?" He immediately gave an order. From now on, Duke Clay's family is not allowed to visit anymore. The female lead noticed that all the gifts had been moved to the reception room, and she also saw her portrait there. Ednis said honestly, "That portrait isn't as cute as the young lady, but still a beautiful gift." The female lead smiled. This time's gift was really nice. Time passed, the seasons changed, and the female lead's body gradually grew. The maid held a spoonful of porridge, using a toy airplane to coax the young lady to eat each spoonful. As her body developed, the female lead went through each milestone, sitting up on her own, holding onto someone's hand to stand up, and using furniture to take steps. Today, the little girl walked on her own without any support. Madame Eris was amazed. "She's walking more steadily than I thought." The soft carpet made her steps a bit wobbly. Ednis thought the young lady was the absolute best and would probably start talking soon. Alice was extremely excited. She was silently glad that her babbling days were almost over, and luckily, no one had noticed that her development speed was unusual. Perhaps because she was a member of the Devon family, any rapid development was considered normal. At this rate, Alice could speak in full sentences before her first birthday. The Devon bloodline inherited power from the Dragon clan, so the female lead guessed she would inherit swordsmanship skills from her father or perhaps magical skills, or be a natural-born genius. But looking at herself, she immediately dismissed the thought of being a genius. At first, Alice only thought about surviving, but now things were different. And as soon as the Duke entered the room, the nanny straightened her back and bowed deeply. Duke Devon visited every day just to see his daughter. Madame Heiress told the master that nothing had happened to Alice during his absence. Lucius walked over as soon as the nanny reported that Alice had taken 10 steps this morning. The little girl almost fell a few times, but quickly got up and continued walking. The Duke immediately picked up his daughter, saying that this moment must be recorded. Alice deserved a reward. 10 steps, no faceplants. Then the female lead caught her father's hand, secretly reaching into his pocket. Lucius took out another flower brooch as a gift for his daughter. Edna's eyes widened as she exclaimed, "This one is absolutely stunning." A deep red light emanated from within, like a ruby forged in blood fire. But because of the sharp and intricate petals, Alice couldn't wear it until she was 8. Duke Lucius nodded, completely agreeing with his daughter's maid. He asked Alice if she wanted to show her father her progress. The little girl took a few steps, and her father immediately showered her with praise. Lucius asked again, "Do you want to play with Daddy?" Alice nodded immediately. He asked, "What game do you want to play?" or "What do you want to do?" It was clear he was trying to get her to call him Daddy, and the female lead found that incredibly funny. Finally, Alice agreed to call him Daddy, and you could tell he was overjoyed, because the little girl had done it. She got another gift today, a brooch without a gemstone, but made from the feathers of a fiery red flying beast. Edna noticed Alice yawn and said it was time for bed. In that moment, the female lead felt her heart soften with hope. Alice just prayed that this joy could last forever, so she wouldn't have to say goodbye. That night, the little girl felt a gentle breeze brush past her hair. The female lead frowned when she heard a whisper, wondering if someone had opened the window. The strange voices kept murmuring about doing something sneaky, which made her extremely uneasy. At that moment, Alice's eyes snapped open, and she looked around to figure out what was happening. But to her complete shock, the room was completely empty. Alice kept wondering, what did I just hear? Who was just here? The window was still tightly shut, but as soon as she reached out her hand, she discovered a strange twinkling light. The next second, that light grew stronger around her hand, drawing her attention like a moth to a flame. Alice looked around, certain that she was still dreaming. Then she clearly felt something lightly touch her hand, a strange but pleasant sensation. Alice immediately froze when the light appeared again. She was truly scared. This little girl started to think there was a ghost in the room, and then she let out a terrifying scream, causing Edna to fall out of bed. Lately, the young lady had been clinging to the master constantly, leaving the maids wondering what was going on. Edna had even been sulking for days, thinking the young lady was tired of her. She suggested Alice change her clothes, and the little girl lit up like a light bulb, a clear smile on her face as they both stepped out into the garden. Duke Devon was pushing the stroller, beaming every time he saw his daughter smile. He offered to show Alice the autumn leaves, then gently picked her up. After that, Lucius tossed the little girl high into the air, and the female lead burst out, giggling. But immediately, Alice fell silent, her face pale, because that strange voice echoed again. Duke Devon glanced at his daughter, wondering why she was so quiet. The strange voices kept murmuring, "Wait a little longer." Alice started to tremble with fear. The adults thought she was afraid of heights and tried to soothe her, but the female lead was truly terrified. Even with her father beside her, she could still hear them. The maid brought out a toy to comfort her, but the little girl didn't react. The man thought for a moment, then snapped his fingers, and a flame erupted in his hand. Alice was utterly amazed, and then the Duke held out his hand and said, "It's been a long time since I used magic." Alice was stunned. It turned out her father had magic too, and she even got to see it with her own eyes. The little girl's face lit up, and she reached out for the flame. The Duke reassured the nanny, "This flame doesn't give off heat." Alice thought the flame was wonderful, not hot, just glowing, and was about to touch it. Lucius warned his daughter, "Fire is dangerous. Don't touch it carelessly." Alice looked at her father expectantly and called out, "Daddy." He replied gently, Daddy's fire is special, so it's okay. The little girl touched it and boom, the flame erupted. The Duke hurriedly waved his hand to extinguish the fire. Ednus panicked and ran to snatch Alice from his arms. But the fire wasn't out yet, and it was heading straight for the female lead. The voices spoke again, saying that this was definitely bad news, which made Alice even more scared. Bright orbs began to appear around them, and the voice mentioned something like a sudden resonance. The female lead flailed her arms and screamed in panic, "Ghosts!" Duke Devon recoiled, then slammed his fist into the ground with all his might. The orbs scattered everywhere, and that voice said nonchalantly, "Actually, it's kind of funny." The female lead pointed at the orbs, screaming in panic, "There are really ghosts." The man didn't understand anything and shouted back at Alice, "What the hell is going on? Tell Daddy everything." The little girl kept staring at the orbs, pointing and screaming, "They're ghosts, Daddy." It was then that Alice realized her father couldn't understand her because she was talking like a child. So the little girl tremblingly pointed at an orb and stammered, "Clearly, Daddy, that's a ghost." Duke Devon looked up, stunned, and murmured, "Spirits." The female lead lay back in her cradle when a voice echoed, "Are you okay, kid?" After hearing the word spirits, Duke Devon paced back and forth, deep in thought. According to him, the female lead had mistaken spirits for ghosts. Normally, spirits do not interfere with the human world, but sometimes there are exceptions when they're forced to attach themselves to someone. When there is a resonance, or, in other words, a shared bloodline. The female lead didn't understand why these spirits kept swarming around her, and the Duke guessed that the magical flame was also created by the spirits. This was rather strange because spirits are usually afraid of dragon energy, and their family had no connection to the spirit world. Alice remembered that in the original timeline, almost no one could control spirits. The female lead finally felt relieved when she realized they weren't ghosts. When Lucius saw Alice summon the spirits again, he called his little girl a genius. But Alice was still too young to control the spirits, and the female lead completely agreed with that. The Duke started to worry when he saw his daughter so scared, so he stroked her head and reassured her. "Don't worry, Daddy's here." The female lead felt herself gradually calm down, and sleepiness washed over her. Eris Sepon, the Wind Mage, confirms that Duke Devon's intuition was correct. The little girl truly has a connection with the spirits. It's even so strong that she might surpass him in the future. But Eris also says that Alice is still too young to bear this kind of power. Normally, spirits are not interested in children. Eris warns that if the little girl continues to be afraid of the spirits, her development might be slowed. Lysias admits this is the first time he has seen Alice so scared. The Wind Mage asks, "Can you apply the method you mentioned before?" That method is called sealing, and it is not harmful to the child at all. Once sealed, it cannot be removed immediately, but since Alice is not yet 1 year old, now is the perfect time to do it. Hearing this, Alice's face stiffens. She doesn't understand what they intend to seal. At first, she thought they were ghosts, but now that she knows they aren't dangerous, why do they need to be sealed? What are their side effects? When will it be removed? The protagonist desperately wants to object. Alice sees the spirits gathering around and hears them repeating over and over. "Sel, Sel." The Wind Mage reassures the childlike spirits, "Don't worry, I'm not going to seal you." He explains that he only wants to temporarily seal the connection between Alice and the spirits. Eris asks the spirits, "Did you hear how scared the little girl was?" Instead of complaining about being wronged, the spirits should apologize to Alice first. They clearly broke the rules, yet they made an innocent little girl suffer the consequences. The Wind Mage calmly announces, "We will perform the ritual tomorrow." Then the old man begins to mutter and curse. What are you trying to whisper to a child who isn't even a year old? Eris waves his hand, signaling the spirits to retreat, saying the ritual must be done as soon as possible, as these spirits have gone too far. The old man says, "Don't worry, I used to hunt high-level monsters with the previous Duke Devon." Eris bows his head, saying he will prepare everything for the ritual. The protagonist stares blankly at the Wind Mage the moment he winks at her. Alice senses that he is not a bad person, but he is definitely hiding something. Lysias asks his daughter, "What are you thinking about so intently?" He tells Alice not to be afraid, because her grandfather will help her so she won't see those things anymore. The Duke is also a little scared, but he says he can trust Mr. Savior, the intermediary mage. The protagonist really wants to tell her father that she is fine, but she can't open her mouth. Lysia sighs wearily, admitting, "Sometimes I feel like you understand everything I say." That makes him a little uncomfortable, because the little girl can't speak yet, but the protagonist understands everything and can converse perfectly. It's just that she doesn't dare let anyone find out. Endorse tells Alice that she will sleep with her tonight, so the little girl has nothing to worry about anymore. Half the night passes, and both are sleeping like logs. And then the protagonist feels the familiar breeze again. Endorse must have forgotten to close the window. The little girl's eyes fly open as she realizes who would leave a window wide open in the middle of winter. It had to be the spirits. Alice thought the mage had already chased them away. The protagonist suddenly notices the cards floating up, and the sight gives her a real chill. The cards begin to form words. Finally, Alice sees an apology for the recent pranks. The little girl's eyes widen as she realizes the spirits really came to apologize. Alice's jaw nearly hits the floor when she remembers that a baby her age shouldn't be able to read. The little girl smirks skeptically. "You think that ghost knows I can talk?" When she hears the reply yes, the protagonist realizes this is a real problem. The spirits promise to keep her secret, and Alice starts to wonder. She wonders why the spiritual energy is weaker today than usual. The little girl thinks it's probably because she was so scared that her perception has dulled. After all, the spirits aren't so bad. When Alice touches a spirit, the protagonist immediately breaks into a radiant smile. Taking a deep breath, the little girl tells the creature that she forgives it. But she is quite surprised when the spirit suddenly shoots up into the sky and glows, thanking Alice and begging her not to seal it. The protagonist sighs wearily and promises to think about it more. The spirit nuzzles Alice's face, and the little girl smiles, feeling that it's just like a pet. The little girl yawns and says she's going to sleep and wishes the spirit a good night. Meanwhile, the people in the palace know they don't have much time and must act quickly. The Wind Mage reminds Duke Devon that there is nothing to worry about. This old man believes everything will go smoothly, without a doubt. Eris asks Alice's personal maid if she has prepared the young lady. The Duke frowns suspiciously, asking, "Why are you so concerned?" He replies, "The older you get, the more wrinkles you have, and the more you like to gossip." Eris glances at Alice's portrait and whispers that it's almost done. Just a few more adjustments are needed. Lysias raises an eyebrow and asks, "Do you just need an empty room for the ritual?" The mage replies that everything is already prepared and asks the Duke back, "How do you plan to reassure the young lady?" The protagonist doesn't understand why he's being so serious. Her father approaches and asks, "Did you sleep well?" The little girl spreads her arms wide, beaming as she calls out, "Papa." Lysias's heart feels like it's beating wildly. That simple act moves him deeply. Because his daughter greeted him so sweetly, he promises to give her a very special gift. Even the maid's voice trembles as she asks, "Is this sealing ritual really safe?" The Duke looks her straight in the eye, his voice serious. "It will be fine. I won't let anything happen to her." A single tear silently rolls down Endorse's cheek as she whispers, "Why are the spirits clinging to the young lady?" The protagonist gently places her hand on Endorse's cheek as if to comfort her. The Wind Mage steps forward. "All right, let's begin the ritual." Eris moves closer, lowering his voice. "Young lady, are you ready?" The old man looks straight into the protagonist's eyes and immediately receives a death glare from the little girl, who is clearly not happy. The Wind Mage announces to everyone present that the spirits have arrived and everything is ready. So Eris asks to hold the young lady, but the protagonist slaps his hand away bluntly, shouting that she won't do this ritual. The little girl glares at the old man. Repeating no, Eris doesn't give up, turning to remind the Duke that the sealing ritual is the best way to stop the spirits from continuing to cling to Alice. Even if they're driven away, if the connection remains, many other spirits will come. And when that happens, the young lady will suffer again, will cry again. If Alice could have spoken sooner, her father wouldn't have had to worry so much. But the protagonist can't reveal her secret because everyone would find out she's not the real Alice. Even so, she believes that she and her father are still on the same side. At that moment, the Wind Mage is stunned when Duke Devon suddenly calls him Uncle Eris. Alice's father says that they will pretend as if nothing happened. The protagonist blinks at her father, completely surprised that he would say such a thing. The Duke promises the mage that he will pay double the agreed amount since Eris traveled all this way. He tells the mage to stay and rest at the duchy for a while longer. However, he also declares with absolute certainty that the sealing ritual will not take place. The protagonist hugs her father tightly, thinking to herself that he is truly the best father. The Wind Mage coldly asks His Grace the reason for his decision, since it was the Duke himself who sent the request for help. Now, he suddenly backs down just because a frail child doesn't like something? Should parents stop treatment then? Eris insists that the young lady cannot yet make decisions like an adult. Before it's too late, he begs the Duke to entrust the young lady to his care. The old man can't believe His Grace intends to abandon his daughter in the midst of insolent spirits. From a certain perspective, that's no different from abuse. One of the spirits approaches the protagonist, pleading with her not to perform the sealing ceremony. Alice understands perfectly well that the spirits don't want the ceremony to happen either. The protagonist reaches out to touch the spirit, while her father summons a flame on his fingertip. The spirit transforms into a little girl and asks her, "Aren't you afraid of fire?" Then she begs Alice to tell her father to put it out. Alice smiles, saying that everything is fine, no need to worry. The little fairy continues to beg her not to agree to the ceremony, because it shouldn't happen just because of their mistake. The spirit promises Alice that they won't follow her anymore, just asking her not to seal them. The little girl begins to cry, pleading with Alice not to seal herself because of them. A status window pops up, announcing that a new event has been triggered. The protagonist's body freezes again, just like the first time she received her new name and leveled up. Your choice will shape the character's future. Alice can do nothing but whisper one thing. The protagonist breaks into a smile, telling the spirit, "We are friends now." She repeats that she had already forgiven them yesterday, and from now on, there's no need to be secretive, even when talking. Alice holds out her hand, saying again, "We are friends now." The spirit smiles, says it will be her friend, then kisses the little girl's cheek, thanking her profusely. The protagonist is stunned. There's no way I'd do that. The very next second, the Wind Mage bursts out laughing, stunning the entire room. The protagonist has no idea what's happening or why he's acting so strangely. Alice blinks in surprise as Eris suddenly pushes the spirit aside with no difficulty at all. The little girl frowns, wondering, does he really think he can pull that off? The protagonist jumps when the old man suddenly pats her on the head. Eris admits the young lady is truly exceptional. The spirit approaches her again, and Alice worriedly asks if it's okay, immediately receiving a thumbs up. The Duke sighs, admitting he doesn't know whether to scold or be proud of his daughter. He thinks Alice has been full of surprises lately. Lysias tells Agnes to call the servants to clean up and restore the room. Duke Devon turns to Eris and says that he went too far this time. But the Wind Mage retorts, to deceive the enemy, you must first deceive your own. Since the matter is settled, he suggests the kids have some tea. The protagonist suddenly realizes she has been completely fooled without knowing when. Alice sits at the table, trying to piece everything together. The mage takes a sip of tea and swears on his life. 15-year-old Adora tea leaves, truly top-notch. The Duke replies that compared to Eris's recent performance, this is indeed a humble gift. He asks the mage to explain the ritual from beginning to end, because Alice still doesn't understand what's happening. Eris remarks that His Grace has really changed lately. The mage recalls that 4 years ago, Lysias said he had no intention of having children. First, Eris brings up the matter of contracts and age. He emphasizes that he had said spirits rarely appear to young children. Simply put, contracting with a spirit means communicating with them and borrowing their power. To do so, the master must have a strong will, a clear mind, and a high level of control. Through the connection, they both exchange magical energy. It is often said that spirits only appear when one turns 7, but the truth is a bit different. Duke Devon asks, "What do you mean?" The mage replies, it's not the actual age, but the ability to control at that time. A child who can attract spirits already has the potential to control them. That's why when Eris received the letter, he felt something was off. The Wind Mage concludes that this young lady is extremely intelligent and talented. But there were some vague details in the letter. As His Grace had said, first, the young lady was afraid of spirits. Second, she was no different from her peers. Eris says that he read the letter carefully and all the praises about the Duke's daughter. But overall, Alice was just a little smarter, not exceptionally outstanding. Controlling spirits requires a high level of control, where pure intelligence means little. Based on the characteristics of the Devon family, Eris became even more interested and decided to observe everything firsthand. Afterward, the Wind Mage realized his initial assumption was completely correct. The young lady was only startled by the sudden appearance of the spirits. The spirits also didn't expect to receive that reaction. But as the heir to the Devon house and the one chosen by the spirits, Alice wasn't really that outstanding. Therefore, Eris deliberately mentioned the sealing ritual because hidden potential often emerges in emergency situations. The Duke asks what would have happened if things didn't go according to plan and Alice refused the ritual. Eris smiles and says he would have performed the ritual himself. Alice's father sighs, saying that the mage hasn't changed at all, while Eris says the Duke has changed a lot. In any case, nothing bad would have happened because that seal would have dissolved on its own after 5 years. The Duke declares that is the biggest problem with Eris's approach. Suddenly, the mage says he has one more question. It's related to the preparation for the ritual and is quite important. He mentions the brooch that Duke Devon gave to the young lady. The brooch surprised Alice because it was incredibly sparkly. It might be made from a very rare gemstone from the Ambak region, which is famous for the beauty of its gems. The way the brooch was set was also strange, not like the work of an ordinary artisan. The Duke nods, complimenting the Wind Mage on his sharp eyes. He also notices Eris's eyes burning with curiosity and asks who made the brooch. After a moment, the Wind Mage returns to his carriage and says that he must leave as work is piling up. Before leaving, he tells the young lady, "Making friends with spirits is great, but you should postpone signing a contract for now." Alice asks why, and Eris explains that she is still too fragile. Duke Devon tells his daughter that they will consider signing a contract later. The protagonist breathes a sigh of relief that everything has been resolved. She wonders if she can speak clearly now. It turns out her worries were completely useless. The adults look at the young lady as if she were the most wonderful person in the world. So Eris didn't need to be so tense. Now the protagonist can talk, and she even has some close new friends. Things are getting better than ever. Agnes tucks Alice in and mentions that she has a little bit of prophetic ability. The maid recounts that a few days ago, she had a dream in which the young lady was talking to someone. She couldn't hear the other person's voice, but Alice said a very gentle goodbye and wished them a good night. That's why Agnes was so shocked when the young lady started talking during the day. The voice was exactly the same as in the dream. The protagonist closes her eyes, telling the maid that she wants to go to sleep now. Agnes immediately turns off the light and wishes Alice a good night. The protagonist smiles, flustered, then realizes she will have to be much more careful next time. There are only 2 months left until Alice's first birthday. Since it's her first birthday, the Duke wants to celebrate it in grand style. The nanny and the maids immediately understand what's coming, and the entire mansion descends into chaos for a few seconds. Some are panicked by the long guest list, while others don't know what kind of fabric to choose for the dress. But the invitations are already printed and ready. Everyone is busy preparing for Alice's birthday, except for Agnes, who is stuck babysitting. No one dares to come near the nursery. The maid is trying to teach Alice some new words, perhaps also because of what that mage had said. Lysias suddenly enters to see his daughter, but finds her busy with something. He tells Agnes to step out for a moment to talk privately about Alice. As soon as the protagonist is alone in the room, she sees her friend and raises her hand to call. A green orb of energy immediately circles around Alice. The little girl wants to know her friend's name. It turns out to be Siffy. The protagonist repeats the name to make sure she heard it right, then asks for a favor. The spirit, of course, does not refuse the request. Alice tells them to hide, and even though they haven't signed a contract, they obediently do as she says. Not a single question, which makes the little girl ecstatic. The protagonist decides to experiment a little. Today, the little girl steps in front of the mirror again, still unable to stop admiring her cute face. And she's completely shocked by how impressive her status board is. The bonuses from the level 9 cube must have upgraded her appearance quite a bit. Siffy tells the protagonist that someone is entering the room. Alice immediately returns to her spot, and the spirits also disappear. The Duke reappears in the room with Agnes just a few seconds later, his arms full of gifts of all sizes. They're all for Alice, although there's still time to give gifts at the party. They have already been sent in advance, so the adjacent room has turned into a gift storage. This is the first time the protagonist has received so many congratulations, and it's all thanks to the Duke. The little girl immediately jumps into her father's arms. The first gift is from the Marchioness Red Rose. She sends her wishes for health and prosperity to the Duke and Duchess Devon, along with a music box perfect for playing while the young lady is sleeping. The next gift is from the Artisans Guild. They want to express their gratitude for the recent orders, which surprises Lysias quite a bit. It's a handmade teddy bear with some kind of necklace around its neck. The note says it needs to be opened, so Agnes tells the little girl to let her handle it. Inside is another amethyst flower. The maid continues to pick up a new gift. She's about to read who sent the box, but immediately becomes flustered, her bewildered expression clear. It turns out to be a flower pot with a rather cute color containing the seeds of the azuralis flower, a species that only grows in the north. Agnes suggests looking at another gift. Suddenly, the note from the last gift flies into the air and lands right at the little girl's feet. The protagonist stares at the paper, stunned. She realizes the flower pot came from Herman. Alice guesses it was sent by that smiling boy and wonders why they hid his name. Last time, Herman didn't want to leave Alice, so Lysias had decided not to let the Caeli family visit. The little girl realizes her father is angry. She likes the boy, and her father is jealous that Herman got to be with her even though he's only 5. The Duke also knows his daughter saw everything. Alice is desperate to say something, but she knows that saying more will only deepen the misunderstanding and get Herman into trouble. So she asks, "Who is Herman?" Then the little girl reaches out to gently touch her father's cheek, calling the Duke Papa in a cute voice and saying she loves him. Lysias replies that he loves her too, but it takes a moment for him to realize his little daughter has just confessed her feelings. And right next to Alice is a heart-shaped card. Agnes's face lights up with joy. She immediately congratulates him on the wonderful moment. Lysias looks at his daughter again with warm and loving eyes, then hugs her tightly and says, "I love you just as much." Alice laughs with delight, and Lysias is nearly choked up by her words. He says he will give Alice another gift, something truly wonderful and special, and promises to prepare it as quickly as possible. The little girl exclaims that her father is the best in the world. That statement moves him completely. He holds his little daughter in his arms, whispering an apology, but Alice just giggles. Lysias tells Alice that he has shown her his worst side and that he is truly ashamed. From now on, he won't forget anyone who brings a gift. The little girl mumbles something about there being more gifts from Herman. The Duke's face immediately shows a look of confusion. The spirits inform the protagonist that Herman has sent more gifts, so Alice asks her father about it. Agnes waddles in with a few more gifts. It turns out they were all sent by Herman. The protagonist starts to think if someone sent too many gifts, when a maid suddenly starts reading a letter. Herman writes that he misses Alice terribly and wishes for her to always be healthy. In the second letter, the boy says that he really wants to visit, but the trouble is that Duke Devon still hasn't given permission. Agnes opens the third letter, where Herman writes something like, "What do you mean Alice's dad won't let me visit? I'm so confused." The protagonist can only imagine how sad the 5-year-old boy must be when no one tells him the reason. Lysias promises it won't happen again. Since this is the first time, Alice decides to let it go. The protagonist's face lights up with a happy smile, making everything around her seem to brighten. Then she calls her father super handsome, and Lysias is completely moved by his daughter's words. Agnes can't hold back her tears witnessing the scene. Not long after, a letter from Herman arrives. In the letter, the boy excitedly writes that he finally got permission from Duke Devon. He really wants to play with Alice, but because his father is so busy with work, he can't come just yet. However, the boy firmly promises that he will definitely be there on her birthday. Jennifer thinks Alice probably doesn't remember them because their meeting was too short to leave an impression. Herman was sad about this at first, but now it's all okay. It turns out the boy had planned to come early on the day of the party, so they would have more time to play. Just hearing that makes Duke Devon's face immediately darken, clearly annoyed. Alice just hopes they stop tormenting Herman. Her birthday is also approaching. The protagonist takes a deep breath, still completely unaware that her father and Agnes are always whispering and plotting something. They are actually discussing which brooch to pin on Alice's dress. Agnes insists on choosing the 114th brooch, but Lysias dismisses it, saying it's absurd. He insists that the 98th one is the only true choice. Agnes says that one is too flashy and not suitable for a child. The protagonist is sure their argument is always like this. Siffy glides past the little girl and whispers. Lady Eris looks very busy. She probably doesn't have a minute's rest. The guests are pouring in, which means she doesn't get a break at all. Alice starts to think that the maid taking care of her should get a long vacation after this. Just then, Agnes pops in to ask if the little girl is bored from sitting alone. All the preparations are almost finished, so the maid suggests taking the young lady for a walk around. Of course, Alice agrees immediately. This event will have more guests than expected. Agnes asks, "Isn't it wonderful?" But Alice isn't very excited. Who would have thought that the birthday party of a supporting character would have so many people? Just then, a system window pops up in front of the little girl. It reminds Alice that on her 9th birthday, her own father will tear her to pieces. So, the reality hasn't changed at all. The only way to upgrade a character's rank is to increase their influence on the plot. Character ranks are divided into 5 levels, and the rule is very simple. What matters is the role in the story, not status or title. Take Cinderella as an example. People like the messenger or her father are background characters. The stepmother and 2 stepsisters are supporting characters. Even the fairy godmother, who took Cinderella to the ball, is just a supporting character. Only Cinderella and the prince are the true main characters. What's important is how much you shape the story. Looking back at Alice, everything becomes clear. Even as the only daughter of Duke Devon, the family that inherited the dragon's bloodline, the little girl was originally just a background character. Now she understands why she couldn't remember Duchess Devon. The real story only begins after the girl's death. The novel, the protagonist was pulled into starts when Anadio turns 14. At that time, Alice is only 10. The little girl now has a good relationship with her father, but the fate of dying at the age of 9 has not changed. Lysias will surely be devastated when he realizes the mistake he has made. To avoid tragedy, there is only one way: level up as quickly as possible. Alice doesn't know exactly what rank she needs to reach to change her fate, but she certainly needs to continue improving her skills. Only then can she find a way out. Alice has tried to level up on her own, but failed. Agnes picks the little girl up and says, "Let me help this time, but next time, you should try again, young lady." The question is, when will she truly grow up and be able to raise her rank? The young masters and ladies will arrive tomorrow, so all preparations are being made urgently. The drawing room is also being arranged at top speed. Alice is very surprised that her father would approve of such things. A maid calls Agnes for help hanging the window curtains, as everyone is swamped. The maid asks Alice if she agrees, and of course, the little girl nods. Agnes says she'll be right in the next room, and if anything happens, just call and she'll come running. Then the maid leaves immediately after. Everyone is so busy, they're almost going crazy. The protagonist starts playing with a ball, but is surprised when someone knocks loudly on the door.